What's going on, everyone? My name is Rosendo. Welcome back to my channel, and we are back with another video. Today we're going to be breaking down Empty and Alone. Now I want to break down this track for two reasons. Number one is when I released my EP overview, I never had the plan to break down each track one at a time, but I did want to break down at least one of them. And the reason was because I just felt like I wanted to break down one of my tracks because I've done plenty of track breakdowns, but not anything for something like out of my EP, nothing out of my Expression EP, nothing that I feel really captures my sound. So I did have the plan of at some point breaking down just one of them, and we're going to do that today. We're going to be taking a look at Empty and Alone. I thought about maybe doing this one or Twilight or Journey Beyond, but I think it was always going to be Empty and Alone because I mentioned that how I think Empty and Alone is kind of the primary track of the EP. It's kind of captures the EP in the best way. It's placed in the right spot. It captures the emotion, the sounds, and pretty much everything in the way I like. So it was always going to be this one. So I did have the plans to break this track down at some point. Now, reason number two is because I've been kind of changing up the content I've been making because I can't do track breakdowns forever. But I've been also kind of going over some concepts, some ideas. I know in the past I've talked about making a few videos that are a little bit more concept-based and idea-based, just to introduce some ideas and concepts to the world, to the to producers, to DJs, to hopefully maybe inspire them and implement them in whatever they're doing in their production, in their sets, in their DJ sets, whatever. And I like those videos, but those videos require a little bit more kind of precision. They require a little bit more require to be a little bit more effort to be put together eloquently if I'm going to be making these points and these ideas that I really want people to take seriously and start listening to. So although it's nice making those videos, and don't get me wrong, I actually want to remake those videos in the future. I want to put them out now, but in the future I want to remake them with kind of a little bit better, a little bit more careful wording, a little bit more careful decision making, maybe trying to find some some sources to back those things up. But the point is, those are nice videos to make and all, and I want to make those videos, but it also kind of took away from the whole turning on my camera and talking about my music type videos that I really like, because I like to ramble, and I feel like in those videos I really want to get the point across cleanly, but I like talking about my music. I like sharing my ideas, sharing my inspiration, hopefully to inspire people in kind of a more natural way. Not to say that those videos aren't natural, because they are, but they definitely need to be put together a little bit more cleanly, a little bit more kind of they need to be a little bit more direct versus something like here I can just turn on my camera and talk about my tracks, talk about Empty and Alone, talk about Release, talk about whatever it is I need to talk about. So that's what we'll be doing today. It's hopefully just gonna be a little bit more relaxed of a video, because on the other ones, again, I need to be a little bit more careful about how I'm putting my point, how I'm getting my point across. Here we're just talking Empty and Alone. So without further ado, let's hop into FL Studio. All right, we are back in FL Studio looking at Empty and Alone. And you know what, I do miss this. I like my track breakdowns. I like just talking about my music. I like talking about the whys and all that stuff. So it's, again, I've been planning to make this video for a while, and I just felt like the right time. I wanted to get some concepts across, talk about things that aren't just track breakdowns. But I think it's finally time that I can take a look at this track. And again, don't get me wrong, this is probably the only track I'm going to break down out of my Expression EP. But I have more tracks coming out. I'm going to break down all of those. I actually just released a track for distribution, and that's going to be out March, like the first weekend of March or the second weekend of March. And then I'll break that one down. And then I have planned an April release, and then a May release, and then some few other things. So more tracks on the way, but this is probably the only one I'm going to break down out of my Expression EP, and I guess the last track breakdown for a while until that next track comes out, and then I'll probably just break it down that same week. All right, time to snap back into the track breakdown mode, because I don't even remember where to begin. I mean, I remember where to begin, but I kind of got distracted from the whole turning on my camera and talking type thing, because again, the other ones needed to be a little bit more organized. I kind of knew what I was doing in the beginning, middle, end. Here, I kind of forget. So let's see if we can kind of get back into the rhythm. Starting with talking about the track. I know usually I talk about the mixer tracks. Here we are looking at 56. More than I remember, actually, but hey, not bad. Project info over here, Empty and Alone, 21 hours, pretty normal. I started this 24, it looks like in the summer of 23. Actually, yeah. So summer 23, which makes sense because I think it's one of the first tracks I started for my Expression EP, which was released in the end of 24. So it was probably, again, mostly done by the start of 24. I worked on the other tracks. And then near mid 24, end of 24, I finished it and submitted it for distribution. All right, so of course I need to start by talking about why I made this track. Where do I even begin? Well, let me start by thinking. I can't even remember if I had planned this Expression EP out before I made this track. I can't, honestly, I can't even remember. So here's the thing. I talked about how each track was inspired by a piece of media, whether it be a movie or a TV show. This one is kind of the only, well, this one and intro are actually kind of the only exceptions to that. I'll talk about this one in a second, but I think what ended up happening is I'll talk about why I made this track in a second. But I think what ended up happening is after I got 2 or 3 more tracks out that were all directly inspired by a track, and again they came out by a movie or TV show, and again I made them in that order. So Empty and Alone was first, then Betrayal, and then what was third? Twilight. Yeah, and then Twilight. Is that the order? Yeah. Probably. Oh, you know what? Why am I forgetting? Okay, I know why I'm having such a hard time. It's because I think Twilight wasn't supposed to be, and not wasn't supposed to be in there, but I think that's what happened. That's what happened. So Twilight, so now I'm getting carried away again, but I like it. I miss getting carried away, even though I got carried away in all of my other videos. Except for the one I just posted, which I did not get carried away for that reason. Go check out that one if you are in the market for plugins. But now I'm getting carried away even more. Where was I? Okay, so Twilight was originally, I can't remember at what point I made Twilight, if I made it when in that order, if I made it near the end. But I wasn't sure if I wanted to include it in the EP. That much I remember. And I think originally it was supposed to just go intro, Empty and Alone, into case chords. Now something's not right. Intro, Empty and Alone, Twilight, case chords, Journey Beyond. Intro, Empty and Alone, Betrayal. I was missing Betrayal. Yeah. Originally it was just supposed to be intro, Betrayal. No, Empty and Alone, Betrayal, case chords, Journey Beyond. I think. I just can't remember if. All right, whatever. Either intro or Twilight, I wasn't sure if I was going to include. Because I do remember at one point this was going to be 5 tracks. And I can't remember if it was intro that I added or if it was Twilight that I added. Although Twilight was already made, I just didn't know if I wanted it to include it. That's not the point. What was the point of all this? Oh, I remember. The point of all this was that the expression EP wasn't necessarily kind of a complete concept until I had, 2 or 3 tracks out that I thought, oh, you know what, this is going to turn into an EP. Once I realized I had enough tracks, they all shared the same concept, and I wanted to make an EP that kind of portrayed my sound. So why did I make this track? Let's go there. Why did I make this? Why did I name it Empty and Alone? So that's where I normally go with all this. We're 6 minutes into recording and I haven't even gotten to that part. All right, so why did I make this track? Now I mentioned that each track was inspired by a piece of a media, whether it be a TV show or a movie. I'm not gonna say which ones it is, just because I don't feel like it. It's not really important, but this is actually the one exception to this. So Empty and Alone was actually inspired by a different track. I made a track probably in 23, maybe in 22, that had a very, very, very similar feeling, but it's not a track I'm going to release. It had a similar feeling and it kind of portrayed the same emotion, but it was really just kind of, the more I listened to it, the more I realized it was lacking direction. I really liked the feeling of it. I really liked the emotion portrayed, but it didn't really have a clean cut direction, as in, all right, I want this to be the beginning. And then it was just the sounds and patterns that didn't really have, beginning, middle, end, build up, drop, tension, no tension, all that stuff. And originally I wanted to kind of take the feeling that I have in this track, and well, it was in that track, and I wanted to release a track with that feeling, but I wasn't really satisfied. I didn't have a clean cut direction. It just lacked some properties that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was mostly that. It was just kind of the direction. It was more of kind of a collection of feelings and sounds than a track with, progression that I really like. But the point is, once I realized that I didn't really like that, but I still wanted a track with that emotion. And it was around the time the Expression EP was kind of, oh, you know what, it would be nice to kind of get an EP or some works that captured this feeling and the sound that I really like. And that's when I made Empty and Alone. That's when I thought, let me just kind of start from scratch and try to revamp that feeling. And that's how this track was born. So the point of Empty and Alone is really just to capture that feeling. I mean, the title says it all, Empty and Alone. Now, I mentioned that this track is inspired by a piece of, in this case, a TV show. And that TV show, again, shares those empty and alone feelings. Although I talked about in my breakdown that some tracks are a little bit more vague, and some tracks on the EP are a little bit more vague in their interpretation of the TV show or the movie, and some of them are kind of almost directly inspired by them. Empty and Alone is kind of that weird one where it's a little bit more vague, where it's really just taking those feelings in that TV show where the main character is, empty and alone, and just trying to throw them into a DAW and trying to blend with it that winter feeling of, cold air and silence and loneliness and all that stuff that you get, when it's 30 degrees Fahrenheit outside. It gets dark at 4 p.m. And you're just kind of, you're by yourself and you're just kind of thinking, well, what do I do other than just hop into my DAW? This is me at this point. What do I do other than just get to my place and hop into my DAW and try and produce some music? So that's where this Empty and Alone track was born. It kind of takes those winter feelings that were shared by the protagonist of that TV show and it just places them in here. So why did I name it Empty and Alone? I mean, that's pretty much a given. If it's feelings that are being portrayed, it's the TV show that shares those feelings, the protagonist that shares those feelings, and there's not much to say there. But why don't we actually get into the track breakdown at this point, because I've been talking for too long, but hey, that's what I like to do when it comes to these videos that are a little bit less directional, a little bit less organized, because the track starts off with some pads. Where is this? Kind of like a vocal pad. And actually, I was just thinking to myself like 20 minutes ago when I was going over the project file that I really like the sound. What is this? Pad formant choir. Cool. I'm going to use this more often. Anyways, the track starts with this. That's the first thing you hear. And actually, I'll mention the other thing later. That's the first thing you hear. So let's take a listen. Let's turn this up a little bit. You get this emotion, you get this pad that kind of sets a dark and even a little bit empty atmosphere, and you go into the melody. So this melody is a melody and respace. We're going to talk a little bit more about the melody over here, but you actually have two respaces over here. I love respaces. One that's a little bit lower, and one that's a little bit higher. So together, let me see. Yeah, I was going to say, together they layer really well, and they move in opposite directions right here. I'll let you hear that. So one goes down, one goes up, and after that they should just follow each other the entire time. But you also have this melody that just moves down and then also moves back up, which I talked about that I really like in, what track was it? Express that I really like, where melodies just kind of move down. But here it goes down, back up, and back down. But this is the beginning of the track. And I don't want to forget that I'm also supposed to be talking about, why I did these things, because it's not just choosing these sounds because I like them, but it's really just the atmosphere and the emotion that you get across immediately when you go from intro, the first track of the EP. You get that silent outro with the violins and that emotional outro. The first thing you hear is this. Just that pattern. That's the only thing. We're not going straight into some rhythm or anything like that. You just get that emotion and the sound that really establishes what the EP is supposed to feel like, and what the track is supposed to feel like, and what the track is supposed to be about. You also got this harmony that I forgot to mention. Really nice, actually. This should be out of BBC. No, it is. No, this is actually out of Labs. It is not out of the BBC. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. But this is out of Labs. Although, actually, I'll mention it now because this is around the time I started really experimenting with Labs. And Labs has some really nice kind of atmospheric and almost distant sounds. So this track was heavily, the sounds were heavily taken from both Labs and especially BBC. We'll talk about in the drop where this Spitfire audio, which are actually Spitfire at the BBC Symphony Orchestra and Labs, I believe, are both Spitfire. They're both Spitfire. So I really experimented with this. I think I'd got it like a month or a few weeks, like when I started this track, and I just reached for them every single time just to explore what type of sounds they had, and it fit the atmosphere and the vibe of the track really well. Anyways, you get these notes moving down into the melody. Now, one thing I will mention is, I know in the past I've talked about, probably in every video, I've talked about how I find it really hard to start tracks just from nothing, from scratch, and I always need something to kick things off. I believe, well, first of all, this track was inspired by the other track I mentioned, and this is pretty much where this track started, right here. Actually, that's not true. It started right, let me see, is it this? Well, this is just some reverb. But let me show you exactly what this track was inspired by, because this is the original pattern that I had. This is something easy enough that I can make. It has a melody. The D is there the entire time, but the top part of the melody is going down. Up until like the last few moments where I was working on this track, this was the melody, with one exception. It sounded like this. So the melody kind of happened on accident, because this is the melody that I wrote out, and I just put a delay on it just because, all right, probably need some compression, some EQ, some delay. And then it ended up sounding like this. So that part where it kind of has more than one hit where it sounds like this was on accident. You'll notice that with the delay, well, let's see, this is the original melody. With the delay off, it sounds like this. but you put some delay on it, and all of a sudden it sounds like it has some extra hits. Which leads us to there. Hopefully this is. Oh yeah, I need to just take this off. There you go. Which leads us to this. This is the melody we're working with, and up until like the last 80% of the track, I didn't even have this. I was just working with a delay, and then I was running into some stereo imaging problems, and I realized, well, this is the melody I hear. This is the melody I need. So then I wrote it out this way. But this is basically where the track started. It started with probably some chords. Maybe I took some inspiration from the chords in the other track. I actually cross-referenced them, and the chords aren't the same. So it's hard to say exactly where I started with the chords and with the pads. But this melody is basically where the track started. So here we are. We get some more synths, some more impact. We got some more pads, some strings that I will basically include in every track, which I want to say every track out of this EP has, actually. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say every track out of this EP does. Into the first drop. So this is actually an interesting track because it's the first track I believe I've released that kind of has the drop presented to you right away, right at the beginning. And there are tracks like this that I really, really like. Let's name a few. Well, let's name two. Let's name Sad Machine and Divinity, because, I mean, those are just my two favorite tracks. But I don't really have a lot of tracks that do this, that kind of right off the bat present the drop with the drums, especially. So that's one of the things I really, really like about this track, and it establishes the progression. It allows you to do some really nice things over here and over here. But that's basically where we start with this track, and it introduces the track nicely and introduces the feeling nicely, and especially for being the first track of the EP after intro. It accomplishes that really well by giving you exactly what the EP is going to sound like, giving you supersaws, giving you a melody, giving you some respaces, and giving you some really nice atmospheres, strings, plucks, supersaws, more supersaws, and I thought I was missing something, but I am not. So just all that stuff. So again, kick, snare, a bunch of other stuff that don't really matter, but it's just really just establishing that emotion and that supersaw right away, which really allows you to hit harder. This will make more sense in context over here, but just giving you that drop right here immediately just does a really nice job for establishing the emotion. Of course, we move on to this part, which is probably the two most important phrases of this EP, kind of these two right here. Actually, these three. Because if you notice right now, literally all we have is the respace with this kind of atmosphere for a slight variance. But other than that, you're just listening to the respace. Now, why is this important? This is extremely important, people, and I'm not making this up. Now, I know I've talked about in the past about making every decision with intention and all that stuff, and if I put a sound there, it's not just because I want it there, it's because I did it that way intentionally and all this other stuff. Half the time, I'm not even rambling any of the time. I think like 10% of the time I'm not making stuff up. I think 10% of the time it's arbitrary. The other 90% of the time it is mostly intentional. So this part is very important for the track for two reasons, 2.5. Let's start with the half reason. Number one, this is actually this is super important now that I think about it. Where do I even begin? Well, let's just start as a whole because we're starting with intro. Intro is a very important track of the EP. I can't remember where I placed it on my my tier list. It was either B or A, because it doesn't do a lot of things, but the message is just so important. I believe it was B actually, because Betrayal was A, but intro was B, or one or the other. But in any case, the message of intro is just so important, where it's asking you, well, two things I need to mention. Number one is it's asking you to take into consideration the decisions of the producer and really ask yourself, well, why did the producer do this? Why is the track like this? Why is it not something else? And it's just asking you really just to listen. It's not really asking you to necessarily evaluate. It's not asking for you to look for the groove, look for a rhythm. It's not asking you to dance, because it is not electronic dance music. It is simply electronic music. So intro is all about listening. It's all about kind of, taking a step back and saying, you know what, I'm just going to listen and see what the producer's doing and ask why the producer is doing this. So there's two, that's kind of the first reason I did that. The second reason and the third reason kind of go hand in hand. And where I was going with this is the reason the intro is so important, asking you to listen and just asking you to kind of just take a step back, is because I knew in my intro EP I would be doing things like this. I would be doing things like having parts of the track where there's really just one noise playing. And part of the reason is that because this is kind of one of that other the half reason of why I left it this way is because, as I mentioned before, this EP isn't really necessarily meant to be something that you would obviously play at at a party. You're not going to play this at a party. But it's unlike a lot of electronic music. It's not something that, it's meant to be upbeat. It's not something that you're meant to listen to, when you're in the car, when you're hanging out with your friends. It's not meant to be listened to as background music. It's meant to be listened to the way I like to listen to my favorite albums, which is with no distractions. It's basically just headphones on, maybe even eyes closed, and just, absorbing it for whatever it is, an EP for 30 minutes, an album for 60 minutes, just really listening to each track and paying attention to the details, listening to strictly the music and not being distracted by other things. I'm not listening to this in the car. I'm not listening to this, while I'm doing homework or anything like that. I'm not listening to this while I'm exercising. I listen to these albums I hold so closely to my heart, I hold so dear to my heart. I listen to them, just with headphones, with no distractions, just, sitting down, laying down, and my eyes closed maybe, and just really appreciating and observing and listening to the sounds, the atmosphere, the emotions that the artist is trying to get across. So the reason this is so nice is because if you listen to this the way you're meant to listen to it, which is just, let's imagine that the way I listen to something like Worlds by Porter Robinson, lights off, laying down in bed, headphones on. If you listen to it that way, it allows you to do two things. Number one, you just get the pure emotion from the respace. If you're not looking for the rhythm, if you're not looking for all this crazy sound design, you just get the raw emotion of having your eyes closed and hearing the respace and just kind of getting lost in it and kind of appreciating it and feeling that almost that emptiness that is not only in the track, that not only the track is trying to get across, but it's also in the track, and the respace just inherently kind of gets across because, I feel like respaces have that emotion to them. So it just really allows you to absorb that emotion, and it allows you to do exactly what was done in intro, exactly what intro asked you to do, which is take a step back. Don't look for all these electronic music elements, but just listen. Just listen and let yourself be enveloped by the emotions and by the sounds and by the atmosphere. Now, that was the big point. The other big point here is that this EP was always meant to be about the intentions and the emotions and the decisions, which means that for the next about 3 phrases, there is not a lot going on. It is very minimalistic. And it's the fact that this follows intro works so well, because if you do exactly what intro was telling you to do and you just listen, you kind of get these moments where all you get is some emotion and some sounds, and they're so minimalistic, but you appreciate them, which allows you to appreciate the rest of the EP, which will be a minimalistic EP. Because as I've said before, maybe I haven't actually in this case, this EP was meant to be minimalistic. It was never meant to be about the sound design. So with this part of the whole track where you get just this Reese, just the melody with a pad, just the melody with an atmosphere, and then you get the Reese back over here. This part's a little bit more kind of more full, more complete. Drums, Reese, melody, pads, strings, atmospheres, all this stuff. Actually, we'll talk about this in a second. But so we'll just say these 2 phrases instead of these 3 phrases right here. These 2 phrases, they are meant to be minimalistic, and if you can just kind of if they're placed intentionally right after the intro EP, which asks you to pay attention, and then you get these parts, which are super minimalistic. They're super kind of beginner producer. I'm sure every producer, the first or second project file they ever made, goes straight from one pattern to another. Just no transitions. It's just that's how you make a track. You just do one pattern here, different pattern over here, and then it's just a very, very rough transition. But that's why I like this. It has that minimalism to it. There's a few sweeps. This is a very, very light sweep, light reverse you hear in here. This gets filtered down just to bridge it a little bit more and to essentially take it away, because what you do here is you take it away. But when it gets filtered down, it's not as harsh. And this atmosphere comes in a little bit earlier, just to, again, make it feel like it's not necessarily a transition, but it just feels like this element is going away and a new element is coming in. Instead of just hitting, they kind of just, they come in softly. But other than that, there's no sweeps, there's no transitions. It's just meant to be one element and then another element right after. So again, the whole point of this is, I'm actually curious to see how long I've been talking about this for, because I have no clue. The whole point of this is Right after the intro EP asks you to take a step back and just listen to intentions and let yourself be controlled by the emotions and by the feelings and the kind of the whole atmosphere the artist is trying to get across, you get something like this. You get the minimalism where I want you to pay attention. I want you to, close your eyes, listen to this as if you were listening to this and paying attention. Because if you're listening to this in the car or while doing anything, this just sounds like empty space. There's just a respace going and nothing else going on. But if you're paying attention and you're listening and you're really just trying to let the music kind of come in on you and close in on you, then you get the emotions of the tracks. You get the emotions of the respace. You get the emotions of this transition right here where the melody comes in and everything just feels minimalistic and it's all just there in the most subtle way possible, where the kind of that vocal pad is there, the melody is there, that pluckiness with the delay is there. And it just sounds so nice. It gets the emotion across very well without having to fill the track in with unnecessary things, because this track is not about unnecessary things. It is about emotion. This EP is about emotion. Anyways, enough about that. We can move on, because after all that, we get to this part. And this is actually one of a really nice part. There's all sorts of things. I'm not going to break down every single element in this track, because I don't know why I've been breaking down every single element. It's never about the elements. It's all about the emotions, which come into plain view right here. Because one of the best things about this part is you get this little subtle atmosphere right here. That's not the important part. This is the important part right here. Now, this crowd effect is actually just such an essential part of this track, because the whole track is about exactly that, the emptiness and loneliness, where even it just really gets that feeling across where even if you're surrounded by people, even if you're in a crowd, even if you're in a public setting, it still gets that emotion across of, you get these sounds have already established that they kind of carry with it the empty and alone feeling. But all of a sudden you're in a crowd, you're with other people, you're surrounded by people, but you still have that feeling of, even though there's people all around me, even though, I'm with other people, there's still that feeling of being, a little bit lonely on the inside, just like, the protagonist from this TV show. And that's when we move into drop number 1, which I actually really like. I can't remember how much I experimented with putting these supersaws here on drop number 2. I definitely had the supersaws on drop number 3. I want to say at some point in the early versions of this project file, I had this the drop repeating over here in drop number 2. But I didn't really like how it was coming out, and this whole thing just came really natural to me, where you get the hi-hats in, you get the melody in, and you kind of turn it into not necessarily like a lo-fi, but it's kind of like a half hip-hop type, half lo-fi. It's more lo-fi than it is hip-hop in a way. But you get this really nice part of the track where it kind of turns into a beat, and I really like it, because you go from this right here, expecting it again during this drop, which is a very minimalistic buildup, by the way. It's not even clear that a drop is coming in, although it's clear to me, because the kick comes in and you already know that you're due for a drop. So when you turn into a beat, it kind of hits you in a different way, and I really like that. Now, 2 things I'll mention. Number 1 is, let's start with the non-important one. Number 1 is I always need to mention what videos I mentioned this in. I talked about it should have just been Call. I talked about in Call, or actually it was Release, actually. I talked about in Release how this whole kind of call and response and filling things in and basically not using patterns and using samples and things that you only use in one spot was all news to me, was all kind of very strange to me. I actually did that with Intro as well. But here I did it even more, and this is all very, very new, where you kind of drag samples into their different spaces. You'll work with kind of the drums and the hi-hats, and you're using kind of elements over here that come in spurts. I work best with something like this, predictable patterns and patterning things out. I do not work well with things like this. So this is a very important, a very meaningful part of the track and my production abilities, where I start to kind of work with these elements that are a little bit more spread out and just are a little bit more filled, right? It's more like a fill-based part of the track, a little bit more fill and a little bit more sample-based versus more pattern and sound and chord-based, which I'm really, really good at. So this is meaningful to me because it allows me to get better and experiment and produce, tracks like this, but also to my ears and to my taste, it's very, very different, and it's very just complete 180 to me. Not just in the track, but in my style and in my taste. So it flips up the track really, really nicely. And the other thing is, the important thing here now is that because this is kind of like half lo-fi beat type thing, I think it captures the emotions of the track really, really nicely, where you get these big supersaws over here, and you think you're gonna get them again, but it just switches it up into something that's a little bit more laid back, a little bit more relaxed, especially after this crowd just came in, where you kind of hear the outside noises, the public noises, and it takes you into a drop that really, into a drop and a beat that really draws you in. And it kind of forgets about everything else. It forgets about the super saws. It disregards the crowd. It disregards where you're going to go later, because since you're not getting the super saws and you get something like this instead, you don't really know where the rest of the track is going to go. So everything just kind of takes a step back, and it takes you to a completely different world. Now, other than that, the sounds are really nice. All these samples are really nice. The panning is kind of all over the place too. I panned all of these into different directions, so they get filled really nicely. And there's all sorts of things, you know, the string that comes in over here. First time I actually use 808s as a bass, which I also really like. If you listen for the bass, actually, the 808s actually kind of fill in some gaps, especially in the low. And then over here they fill in less gaps, and it kind of becomes a little bit more kind of rhythmic and clean. But here the 808s fill in that gap of the low Reese, and it's a little bit more chopped up. There you go. At the same time, we start introducing these elements over here. Let's see, what is this? Just a little bit of an impact. And what you notice is that this is the same impact you get over here. And in the second half, I added a whole bunch of new elements. And I took half of them and kind of spread them out in the first part of the drop. So you get some impacts over here. You get this nice melody. I really like this hit, actually. And then you get an extra addition over here, which again, most of these should be out of either BBC or Spitfire. This one's BBC. This one is Spitfire. No, this one is Flex. This one is Labs. This one is BBC. And this one is also Flex. So new elements that I haven't really played around with all that much that make their debut, and they add a really, really nice touch of emotion and atmosphere to this track, to this drop, I should say, and the track. So let's listen to it, because again, you get the melody, you get the drums, a little bit more lo-fi drums, and the hi-hat pattern is actually pretty new to me. You'll see that here I have it so that the volume is automated, but then you get some switch-ups over here. In general, pretty standard stuff. Melody coming in, 808 being all over the place, and you'll notice how in the first half of the drop, we're still a little bit more chopped up. You know, these elements are a little bit more sporadic, and then it's very clean in the second part. So the progression and the rhythm there work really nicely. I think I missed this one. No, this is the Labs one. Sorry, this is the Flex one. Violin arp comes in. And the movement over here is all very different, which is also something that's very new to me, but I also really like and I also really want to get good at. Violin is an arp. This movement is different from this movement. This harmony is an interval. This melody is all over the place. The flute is different. So there's a lot of really nice movement that I think you can appreciate, given the fact that this is a minimalistic, not minimalistic, but it's a little bit more laid back of a drop, unlike something like this, right? If those super saws were all in your face, then you probably wouldn't be able to appreciate all this subtle movement, all the subtleties of this drop, because it's meant to be subtle and kind of take a step back, asking you to take a step back and just listen. Listen, appreciate, and let yourself be immersed. And moving on. Typical progression, by the way, in case it's not clear, that I like patterning things out, and that progression is as easy as A, B, C. No drums. Kick over here to establish some sort of a build-up, but the kick actually gets spread out quite a bit. And when you don't know where you're going to go with the track next, kick on every beat. Oh man, I love that switch up. I love the fact that the track keeps moving forward, so the progression is nice. And we keep some elements. Alright, so we actually get this single hit over here that we did not get over here, because over here in the intro, it's a hit on every 4 beats. Over here, it kind of just hits a little bit before the start of the next beat. Plus, with the delay, it's really nice as well. Low reach is there, high reach is there, atmosphere is there, this ambient pad is over there, and we get the crowd back. So we kind of go from, that's the really nice thing about this track actually, is this is where the patterning really makes the biggest difference. I actually wonder if this was here the entire time. Yeah, it was. So a little bit more fills there. That's when the patterning and the storytelling really is really nice in this track. because you start over here with the crowd noises and then it just forgets everything. It's asking you to forget it and get drawn in by this drop, and then we bring them back. But the biggest difference is we're not going to ignore the super saw, because the track starts with this feeling. It brings in the super saw, it kind of forgets it, it brings in the crowd, and then it's ignoring all of it. But when the crowd comes back in, it's asking for kind of more of a resolution to, you already resolved this whole thing by ignoring it. That's essentially what we're doing in this track. What we're doing is we're taking this feeling of loneliness and we're ignoring it with this drop. Where this drop is asking you to forget about it, ignore it, but it's still there. It really hasn't gone anywhere, which is nice. When the crowd noises come back, it reminds you that it hasn't gone anywhere. This wasn't there, so that was the mistake I made. Where was I? It hasn't gone anywhere. That feeling of loneliness hasn't gone anywhere. The crowd is still there. All this stuff is still going on. We get the strings as a fill. And that's when we start to reintroduce the super saw again, the one we heard earlier, although it's filtered. So filtered super saw already has what's coming next. The kick is filtered as well. It should be, at least. Or it's not filtered, but the kick itself is a more filtered kick. And the strings come back in, the ARP comes back in, a melody comes back in, and all these sounds and these atmospheres and these feelings come back in. But again, since that crowd was already there and that feeling of loneliness coming back in, everything else is coming back in and it's being built up into finally a very strong release after the frequency sweeps up. Chords that are actually new as well, and a harder drop, which is actually the most important part of this. Now, I mentioned in my EP, my Expression EP tier list, actually, or my breakdown, it should have been in the tier list, how Betrayal is basically storytelling 101, where it takes an emotion and it resolves it in the same track. The previous track I had did something the one I was talking about at the beginning, the one that inspired this track, did something similar, where it takes that emotion and it portrays it, and it just really has it hit you throughout the track. And then at the end, it just delivers with these super saws and a huge drop that essentially just kind of throw it all away. It not ignores it, because we're ignoring it over here. I don't want to use the word resolves it, because we're not necessarily resolving it in the same way we are in Betrayal, but we are dealing with it. We are, acknowledging the emotion and dealing with it, and dealing with it in a different way. Instead of ignoring it, we're just kind of, we're almost accepting it, and we're almost kind of acknowledging it's there, but just kind of forgetting about it and just letting it go in this drop. So that's why these super saws are so important, because over here we give you an idea of what the track is going to sound like with these super saws. The kick is still a low kick, a filtered kick, snare as well. And then we actually deliver with a hard drop with the full super saw stack. Normal kick, pretty hard snares as well, two of them. This one's just for color. But, and then we just get these big super saws over here where we had, let's see, what is this? Yeah, this is some plucks, but some emotional plucks, some soft plucks. So over here, we just have one, again, this is just a pluck. We have 1, 2 layers. Here we have 1, 2, 3, and this is actually a pretty big layer right here. That's gonna add to that fullness even more. Plus with the drums, all that stuff, it's just gonna make the super saws hit that much harder. Big difference. Looking at the bass too, we get some more basses, which I also heard and I almost forgot about. Here we keep the Reese, actually. Keep the high one, pair it with a mid, and a sub. There you go. Plus the melody comes back. And let's see, what else we have? All these sorts of crashes and fills and effects that also add a really nice touch to the drop. I actually played around with this quite a bit, because this had a lot more effects, but it just was a little bit too sporadic. So I really chose this position of these carefully. So I think they're placed in nice spots where they just add enough movement and enough of a touch to the drop, but they don't overwhelm it. Not to mention this melody comes back over here, which I really, really like. Adds a super nice touch to the drop, actually. So I like the fact that I brought that back. And then we're just delivered with this powerful drop. And again, with the crashes, it becomes a little bit more kind of fill based and less on the sustain. So it's nice in that regard. Plus, again, new chords that we didn't get earlier. Here it's the same 4 chords repeated. Here they change slightly, although it's probably just inversions. Maybe it's not actually, it might not be inversions. I guess the difference is the melody was also moving kind of down and it was distinct in both phrases. Here, the chords were not though. Although this pluck looks like it is. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That's not the point because what we're looking at is the supersaws here. The supersaws over here are just same 4. Over here, they're a different 4 in the second half. So more movement, more kind of powerful, delivers more, and very powerful drop. With a melody. And some nice crashes. That's the other thing I really like about this melody as well, because in the first supersaw drop we get same 4 chords and only 2 layers, and the same melody for 4 bars. 4-bar melody repeated. Over here we get the 4-bar melody that is extended, so it's an 8-bar melody. Same thing with the chords, 8-bar chords, and with a new layer. So that's the difference between the first 2 drops, which is why that second drop delivers so much more, not just because of the drums, not just because of the basses, but because of all those things that are very subtle, but make a difference. Back to the drop. So the whole drop gets repeated, it delivers, really nice drop, nothing I haven't mentioned already. And actually, yeah, these effects are placed in different places in both halves. That's the other thing. But then we go to the outro. And in the outro, we actually get that original melody that I told you guys about, the one without the extra hit, or in this case, delay. With delay, it would sound like this. But without it, it's a little bit more simple. It's a little bit more stripped. And when it gets filtered up, it's a little bit softer. Filtered down, I should say. High Reese goes away and we're left with the low Reese bass spelled with a C for some reason. Atmosphere and the ambience, the pad is a little bit stronger. Not stronger inherently, but because everything else is a little bit more quiet. And you're left with this final note that stretches out a little bit longer. And that is Empty and Alone. Alright, so what did I not mention in this track? I probably mentioned everything. The whole thing was probably a little bit more sporadic because it's been a while since I did a track breakdown. But the nice thing is I think I did mention the important things. And not just the important things as in, oh, I really like this sound. I really like that this sound is placed here. But the important things as in the themes of the track. Because it does capture, first of all, let's summarize because I do want to summarize. Let's start with the simple one. It captures a feeling. It captures the feeling of the EP. It captures the feeling of empty and alone, of emptiness and loneliness, and it captures the sound I want to portray. That's important. And the big other one is, well, there's 2 more big ones. Number 1, it captures the minimalism of the EP, and it's asking you to just listen and experience and be enveloped by and be immersed in. That's another super important part. Especially the fact that this is preceded by intro. This follows intro. It works really well here, and it accomplishes that really nicely, which sets it up for the rest of the EP, because the rest of the EP is also not as, it's not as touched up. It's also going to be minimalistic in certain regards. It's all about the patternings and the pattern and the emotions and the decisions, and less about, all these fills that I actually really like, but it's all about just listening. And finally, the big thing is the crowd effect is just really important here because, again, you get the supersaw drop, you take it away, it kind of, the crowd effect really reinforces the feeling of loneliness because even though you're surrounded by other people, you might still feel like you're by yourself. And it distracts you with this drop. It kind of forgets about it. It puts it in the back of your head with this switch up, this calm switch up, this relaxed switch up. It's a really stripped back and subduing switch up, but it's still there. It hasn't gone anywhere, which is when it finally gets resolved by just dealing with it and just saying, hey, you know what? It's there, accepting it with this drop. Because even though it's there, it doesn't mean you can't have something as beautiful as this drop and just get immersed by not just whatever it is you're feeling, whatever else you might be feeling, but just by electronic music and by supersaws. This whole thing is about expressing emotions through music, and I love supersaws. I love this type of sound. So the fact that this is followed out by something so beautiful as this drop, and it just hits you hard because earlier you had this and this just hits you even harder, is just a fantastic way to conclude this tale. After you got delivered by that beautiful drop, things just calm down and go back to kind of being a little bit more slow, and you just basically go back to normal. After being hit by this, you just go back to normal. And that is Empty and Alone. All right, there you have it, people. That's Empty and Alone. Again, probably the most important track. Not the most important track, but the primary track of the EP, the principal track of the EP, I might say. And there you go. So again, let me know what you guys thought. This is probably the only track I'll break down. Maybe I'll break down something like Journey Beyond. But not any of the other tracks, not intro. Intro is more about I've already talked about in the Expression EP overview about what each track is about. And most of the other ones are more about what they're about and less about what I do inside of the EP. This one's kind of both. It's kind of about what I do in here. It's kind of about what it's about, which is why if I did break down another one, it'd probably be Journey. Definitely wouldn't be Intro. Definitely wouldn't be Betrayal. Probably wouldn't be Case Chords. And Twilight, I'm still working on whether or not I like that track or not. As I mentioned in the overview, I do like it. I do like Twilight, but I'm still working on whether or not I like it enough to break it down. But I probably won't. But definitely wanted to break down this track. Probably won't break down Journey Beyond. But don't worry because there are more track breakdowns coming as soon as more tracks come out. I want to say it's the second Friday in March, so keep an eye out for the second Friday in March for the next track. But that is all I have for you. All right. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys thought about the track. Let me know what you liked or disliked, if there's anything you would do differently. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.